I appreciate the fact that you asked me about my art in the context of the conversation that we've been having about religion in general, and specifically African-American religion and culture. I think art is really important for a number of reasons. But you asked me a really important question too, that to some might seem like it might seem like something that doesn't make any sense. You asked me, is there a connection between lynchings and art? And it's kind of difficult to answer that question, Dwayne, off the top of my head, but it's a brilliant question that I think has probably a really complicated response. And I just want to give it a try here because I think you're onto something. When we think about lynchings, we were talking about the context of whiteness and whiteness as religion, and how lynchings took something material. It took these Black people and on their bodies, through these mutilations and burnings and disarticulations of these bodies, these material bodies in the world, white people then cast sort of ultimate meaning, which was contested on Black bodies. When Black people were seen as being out of place, right? In this system in which white people were seen cosmically as being at the center of the world. I would argue that that's still the case. And a Black person was said to have done something that wasn't deferential to a white woman, or didn't cast his, because most of these were Black men. It was clearly gendered. Didn't cast his gaze down when a white woman or a white man walked past them, or did something that was perceived to be out of place or disrespectful to the ultimate place of white people, again, in this world, which I want to understand as religious, then these lynchings took place on these material bodies to point to something cosmic and ultimate about whiteness. And I hope that makes sense, because there's an analogy here when it comes to art, because art does something similar here. Art takes something material, something mundane in the world, paint, canvas, whatever founded materials, and it uses those to point to something transcendent, sometime another reality, a different world, sometimes to critique the world, right? But it's that relationship between the mundane and the transcendent, or the signifier and the signified, that I actually think ties together your question of the relationship between lynching and art. They both, again, take materiality and do something with it. One violent, the other creative, to point to something transcendent. That is, to say something that the materials in and of themselves would not say. They have to be manipulated. You have to do something to them to point to a different reality or a desired reality. And in that sense, lynchings and art, however uncomfortable the metaphor might be, are related.
Now, speaking of art, postcards aren't exactly art, but there are postcards from back in the day, the early 1900s, I guess maybe the late 1800s, Correct. Of lynchings that people would send to each other. Could you talk about those a little bit?
As you know, and it sounds like you spent some time looking at some of the lynching photos. You'll find several online, and there's a collection called Without Sanctuary that you've probably visited. And all of those pictures of lynchings are postcards. And again, I want to say that there's something similar going on here, that these photos of these lynchings, these terrible, terroristic, violent engagements with Black people who were treated as strictly bodies, strictly materiality, for the purpose of reinforcing or reinstating a white cosmos that was seen to be out of whack, right? Or to return it to something akin to a homeostasis in psychology or in family systems, is very related and similar to what's going on here with our conversation in art and these postcards. These postcards, again, functioned as a means of allowing white people to relive these moments, these very violent moments, but which were significant to white people's understanding of their place in the world. Primarily, again, this is a material culture, again, that's part of a religious way of being white in the world. Because these postcards allowed the continuous reenacting or reenactment and reliving of these events that otherwise, especially if you're from part of a Black community, were terrorizing and violent. But for the white community, it allowed you to continuously celebrate that whiteness again prevailed and returned to the sort of the center of the cosmos. But the other thing is it allowed for the sort of travel of terror on the one hand, that Black people in other places who weren't there, right, through these postcards, they function to allow other white people to celebrate. But I can only imagine then that they inculcated a certain sense of violence in the white people who would have received them because they were expected to celebrate, right? Which means that their relationship and their understanding of their relationship with Black people was similar then, or could be understood as being similar to the people who sent them, and who were celebrating them. And I can only imagine then how that also functioned to spread terror to Black people in other places who weren't there. And so these lynching photos, these postcards, as a part of the sort of material culture of a white religiosity, again, that's prior to any institutional form of religion, whether they're Christian, Jewish, or anything else, functioned again as a way of celebrating whiteness, centering whiteness in the cosmos. And again, I want to understand these as primary religious forms, primary religious practices, and that these institutional forms, as I said earlier, are these secondary and tertiary developments of religion that whiteness ends up populating. Right. But that to be white and religious doesn't require any of those things, gods, institutions, creeds, or so on. And so, art is really complicated. It can function, as we've just been talking about, as forms of terror, or the reenactment, reconsumption of white racial terror, but it can also function for other communities, including African Americans, to re-envision a different world, a world that's much more friendly and lively. And you can see that through some of the pieces going on here.